Hey everybody. So I've had a bit of an obsession lately of reducing the amount of energy my home uses, and I was doing some thermal imaging with my thermal imaging camera. I have one of these FLIR TG165X's. Leave a link in the description if anybody wants one. It's one of these bad boys. What I noticed just walking around my house is like certain outlets were hotter than others, and the pattern that I noticed is the GFCIs were about 10 degrees warmer than ambient. So if the surrounding wall is 75, the GFCIs are about 85, or give or take, you know. These are not powered on, obviously, but you get the idea. So what I decided to do was I decided to pick up 3 brand new GFCIs. These 3 are all readily available either from Amazon or Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever your favorite home center is. One is a Legrand, Eaton, and a Leviton. They're all brand new. I figured we would test these, see how hot they get, do a current draw test with nothing plugged in to simulate a parasitic loss that you typically see in your home. And I'd also pull one of my 10-plus-year-old GFCIs that I installed when I bought this house and see how it compares. Maybe we'll find that it's actually worth replacing these things periodically because technology improves. In theory, power draw should go down as technology improves, but that isn't always the case. So that said, if you have, maybe a dozen GFCIs in your house running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that all could add up depending on how much parasitic draw these guys have. So that's enough babbling. Let's unbox them one by one and we'll see what we have. Let's start with the Legrand on the left. And before I begin, please do not do what I'm about to do. It could be considered very unsafe, and I don't want anybody to hurt themselves, so please don't do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make myself a little bit of an entire suicide cord. So I have an electrical plug right here, and the other end is just bare wires. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook these bare wires up under the terminals on this GFCI so we can test it. So I'm going to hook the black up to the gold screw. This is just how you'd wire any normal outlet. White under the silver screw. One thing a lot of people, even some electricians, don't know about GFCIs is that if there's a bunch of receptacles on a circuit and you want to protect a bunch of them with a GFCI, like say an example of kitchen receptacles, you don't need a GFCI at every point there. What you can do is you can hook the downstream receptacles up to this taped off side, which is labeled the load side. So your first GFCI in the string should be wired to these screws here, the line side. Anything downstream that you also want to be GFCI protected, wire to this load side. Save you a fortune on GFCIs. It's kind of staggering how many people do not know that. All right, so I got this wired up. Again, black is going to gold, white's going to silver, green to ground. And I realized I just did this wrong because I need to put my meter in there to measure the power. Let me make myself a little pigtail. All right, so I made a little pigtail wire. I unhooked the black. Now it's possible that we don't get the kind of resolution we need from the fluke meter, in which case I'll bounce over the oscilloscope and do a current draw. But let's start here and see what we get. So I have my fluke meter set up to measure current, and I'm missing one of my alligator clips. Where did it go? Okay, after searching around for a good 5 minutes, I found it. So we'll hook our meter up here and here, not allowing these wires to touch. That would be very bad. Now let's power it on and see what we see. So let's go to AC amps. There we go. So right now we have essentially nothing, which is what I would expect. So let's plug our suicide cord in. It has that name for a reason. Let's see what we see. So We're at 0.0056 AC amps. I think we might switch over to the milliamp scale. Okay, I got things switched over to milliamps. So with nothing plugged in at all, we're at 0.01413 milliamps. Plugged in. With nothing plugged into the GFCI, we're at about 5.46, 5.47 milliamps. We'll let that sit for a minute. All right, 5.479 seems to be our number. All right, maybe not, 5.48. All right, maybe we'll let it sit for a minute. All right, so the Legrand is kind of settled at like 5.52 or, yeah, it's still bouncing around a little bit. Call it 5.52. Let's move on to the Eaton. Unplug the power, disconnect our connections. So just for reference, that is not a lot of power. That's probably, I think I did the math before. I want to say it was like maybe less than $1 per year to run that. So we're not talking about a lot of power here. But again, all adds up. If you had 10 of these in your house, that's $10 a year, $1 per month. Let's move on to the Eaton. Gonna hook it up exactly the same. Interesting. These now here they don't tape off the load side. Kind of interesting. We'll do our line side, sorry, the hot side. And we'll hook up our meter exactly the same way we did before. And hopefully this is not drastically different from what my meter had before, because if it is, then I might blow a fuse, which would be bad. All right, so Eaton. Let's plug her in. Interesting. Now the Eaton is starting off at about 8 milliamps. So let that sit for a little while. This one's bouncing around a bit too, but it seems to be hovering right around like 8.01 or so. Whoa. Oh, my meter just went off. Timed out. I think we'll call it 8 even. That seems to be a fair number for this one. I lied, we'll call it 8.01. Let's move on from the Eaton to the Leviton. Unplug power. Unplug everything else. I am preparing a spreadsheet that kind of shows you the total cost of ownership side by side for all these GFCIs. Just so don't have to memorize all these numbers. So let's hook up the Leviton. Now me personally, I've always been a fan of Leviton products. I guess we'll see if that fondness was unfounded. Hooking it up exactly the same way as the others. One difference I noticed about the Leviton right off the bat is the screws are not pre-loosened like they are for the others. Not a big deal, but just a difference nonetheless. I guess every nanosecond, the electrician doesn't have to do something that saves them time. All right, so Leviton, let's plug it in. What do you guys think? It's gonna be higher or lower than 8? 3. Look at that. I guess my fondness of Leviton is not unfounded. So we'll let that sit, but I'll call that 3.14. Yeah, it's kind of staying around the same amount. Now, I should note that all these GFCIs have a new feature, like an automatic self-test feature, where I think they test themselves every 30 seconds or so. So that's probably going to draw more power, but probably not significantly so. And that's certainly not something my 10-year-old GFCIs would be doing. So yeah, we'll call this one 3.14. Now, one thing we're also negating here is, again, it's going to be very minimal just because of the power usage, but every device that consumes power is also going to be putting out heat, as we saw in the thermal imaging. Now, that's going to be extra strain on your air conditioning system in the summer months when it's trying to keep the house cool. These things are contributing very small amount to keeping the house warm. So again, the effect is probably negligible, but it's something to keep in mind, and it doesn't really represent the total cost of these devices. That's something that's very hard to measure. So I think next, I'm going to log this result here as a 3.14. Then we'll move on and we'll yank out a 10-year-old GFCI and see how it compares. Okay, it's been a couple days later. I finally got around to pulling one of my 10-year-old GFCIs. So got an old Leviton one here hooked up. It's been in my kitchen, seen some pretty high use for the last 10 years. Let's plug it in and see what we see. Okay, so this one looks like it's about 9 milliamps or so, as shown by our fluke meter. So certainly the newer ones do consume less power. Okay, so it's been sitting for a bit, so call this one, call it 9.120 milliamps. I just looked at the data from some of the early recordings, and it looks like this is about 3 times the power that the newer Leviton product takes. So I looked at the data, this one was like maybe 3 milliamps, this one's 9, right? So this one's burning about a watt of power, 24/7, 365. Costing you about, I think, about $1 a year, if I recall. And if you have a house full of these things, say maybe, I don't know, like 10 of them or so, over their 10-year life, that's about $120 worth of power. So that said, I don't know that I would recommend wholesale going out and replacing all your GFCIs with newer ones for the power savings, because it'll take you a while to recoup the cost of that. But as they fail, I would go ahead and replace them with these newer ones, right? This is kind of the work that I was logging as I was recording this video. So you can see here in each column, you have the GFCIs. So you have the Legrand, the Eaton, the brand new Leviton, and the 10-year-old Leviton. You can see the total cost to run 10 GFCIs for 10 years, $74, $170, $107, $42, and $122. So you can see even within brand, Leviton has made a pretty significant improvement here. So nice job, Leviton. So that kind of concludes this episode of Vampire Power Suckers. I'll probably do another episode if you guys are into this. I might do one on smoke detectors next. But anyway, so if you're buying new GFCIs, you're buying them anyway, I would recommend going Leviton. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe, stay safe, and thanks for watching, everybody.